Hey everybody, this is Utikata talking, and it's been a long time since I've done any kind of video tutorial. Now, for those of you who are wondering about all that, what the hell is with this thing and why am I suddenly starting up with the channel again, you can stick around. For those of you who just want the tutorial, just go on, skip right ahead 30 seconds or so, and I'll start the tutorial then. Anyway, for a little bit of life story here, basically what's been happening, well, I had a full-time job. It was very difficult to keep up with all that while trying to do tutorials or, video work of any sorts, let alone the fact that my original stuff was, well, taking up a lot of my time. But because I am gone freelance now, I am able to manage all that, and hopefully I'll be able to upload even more tutorials and perhaps some videos along the way, hopefully. So yeah, that's basically it. Very simply put, it was a very busy time for myself, and now I have a lot more time. Alright, let's get to the tutorial. So we're going to be talking about animation inside of FilterForge. There are a couple disclaimers that I do have to say before I begin the tutorial. First of all, FilterForge is not an animation tool. Alright, there is no animation capability, there is no timeline, there is no keyframing, there is nothing in FilterForge that will help you animate stuff. However, we could utilize FilterForge's capability to change stuff around procedurally to create kind of like a really cool, complicated animation like you're seeing right now. In order to do that, we're going to have to go through some third-party tools, and let me just describe those right now. So in order to export out some frames, we're going to have to use FilterForge's, external FilterForge tools that aren't official. In other words, we're going to be using tools that are created by other people, and you might run into issues there. I can't help you with that. I also can't help you with the fact that I am on a Mac, therefore I'll be using FFmpeg Master, and I'm not going to do a tutorial on that. So if you're on Windows, you're going to have to be using one of these tools, which I have no idea if any of these work. So sorry in regards to that, but I'm going to keep it to just FilterForge, and hopefully this information will let you kind of create your own, and you're going to have to figure out the things yourself. Alright, so let's get started. Inside of FilterForge, I have a very simple filter that I created just to demonstrate the point. So here is one slider called animation, and all it's doing is just offsetting a gradient, and you can see how that is just changing the thing. So this is the basic working principle inside of FilterForge to do some animation. Again, very simple stuff. You can't really do very much. And I'm going to go into the filter editor, and I'm going to show you the filter itself. Alright, here it is. This is all there is to it. So I am basically driving a profile gradient into a kaleidoscope, and you can see how that is already creating some kind of cool thing. Very simple, but it's very effective. Okay, so let's get a little bit more creative than that. This one slider, of course, just controls everything, but you could control anything you want. For example, if you want to have the repeats somehow, go up over time, well, absolutely, there is one the slot you could put it in. You're gonna have to use an integer slider for that. How about color? You could change color over time, like so. But in my case, I feel like offset really does create something here, so let's just kind of keep using that. We could introduce another kaleidoscope. I just copied and pasted, and let's try like a different thing, and maybe like throw this one slider into another part, like maybe move this horizontally. And now we get ourselves a very different kind of animation. You can see how this is very, very simple. And not only that, if you utilize it correctly, yeah, guess what? It actually does loop. And that's how I've been basically creating all this stuff, to just make it loop. Let's just keep going on and add even more nodes. And in the meantime, I'll also describe like how to use Perlin noise and just kind of loop that as well. Alright, so let's throw in maybe like a transform. How about a rotation? We could rotate it. It's like throw in a rotation. All right, that's cool. And so now it's rotating. And very simply put, you could also drive the rotation in funny ways. Like, for example, utilizing another part of this filter to just kind of create these sorts of abstract shapes. Pretty cool, huh? And so this is how you kind of go around creating filters in general. This is very, like, that animate, as you can see. So I'm going to save that out, and let's just render it. Let's talk about rendering stuff inside of FilterForge, right? So first of all, in order to render out an animation, we're going to have to use something like a batch renderer. You could use a command line renderer if you want to, if you're really into programming and stuff like that. It's not that difficult. But to me, it is a little complicated, so I like to use tools that like this in order to help myself. So I have FF Batchmaster 1.0, I believe, and unfortunately, I don't know why the 2.0 version just kind of like doesn't work with the sweep here. So what I did was, so just to kind of give you a rundown of what exactly is going on, basically you need the FF command line renderer, which is FFCMD. That's available for all installations of FilterForge. Just look for that. And you need an output directory, which I already have set up, and the filter to run, which is the animated example, which is what you're seeing right now. You want to have, it doesn't have to be animation. You could always set up your sizes, and but what you want to be careful is the number of frames. Basically, this is going to determine how long the animation is going to last you for. If it's 200 frames at 30 frames a second, well, that's basically how you want to think. So let's just keep it at 200 because I think that's a pretty good number. If you go any lower, it does tend to be too fast. If it's too long, then, well, you're going to have a very, very long piece of animation. It's just going to be frustrating to watch. Okay, and lastly, the parameters that we want to animate. This is going to be the one, slider. I have a checkbox in the slider animation, and right now it's set to random. I want this to sweep. So I want this to go from value 0 all the way up to 1. I'm going to save that, and that's going to set it up so that, well, it sweeps. And I just have to start the batch. Let's check it out. Yep, it is done. And let's go into After Effects and just drag this animation in, and we could check it out for ourselves. All right, pretty cool, pretty simple. It doesn't have any color, as you can see, very simple, but we got ourselves a very, very simple piece of animation that we were able to render out relatively quickly. Let's get a little bit more complicated, more motion graphics. I want to do something that's a little bit more interesting and intricate. Let's go into the same filter, and I'm going to use something here to drive a lot of it. So let's just keep using this, and instead of having it so that it just kind of goes, goes from black to direct white, let's just hit mirror. Now we got ourselves some nice smooth animation. This is going to smooth out stuff. And how about we drive some dots with it? So let's go in and use the bomber, and let's put this in to, let's just say size. How about that? So now, notice how this simple setup could create all sorts of cool things. So I'm going to increase the number, and now we got ourselves something that looks like LED lights. Pretty simply put, these LED lights just self-animate without really doing very much. Of course it's not perfect, but it works. Okay, let's try putting some color on it because it is a little boring to just kind of look at that. Let's drag in, for example, like a random noise gradient like this one. And let's try to avoid flickering because I don't really like flickering stuff. In order to do that, you want to make sure that your scale is relatively large. You don't want it to have it too small, like, this is just going to flicker all over the place, like just a bunch of lines there. What you want is just a nice smooth gradient that runs across. Of course, unless that is you want a very noisy piece of animation. All right, so that's good. Let's throw that into the tint color, and we're going to have to change the tint mode from color to normal. All right, so we got ourselves some dots going in and out. Let's check it out in terms of animation. Pretty cool. Notice how there's also no preview for this, so I have to deal with it in my head. Of course, I'm going to have to look at it each and every time, try to determine what's wrong, and debug certain things if I have to. I kind of want a little bit more for this, so I am going to use another ellipse to drive the opacity so that we get ourselves some nice focused area of sorts that just kind of animate here instead of just animating all over the place. Of course, it's up to you on how you want to drive all the animation here. So I'm not going to stop you from trying to do anything you want. Okay, let's also, let's offset this a little bit, because right now it's just a regular grid. I mean, cool, but kind of boring to me. I'm going to use a profile gradient, and I'm just going to kind of like, you could put it to the half the amount of repeat if you want to. I don't really care. I'm going to just do it eyeball. And I'm going to throw this profile gradient right into the bomber, and you can see how that offsets the thing, make it look a little bit more like a honeycomb. Alright, let's see what happens when we render this out, right? Save filter. It's a little bit more complicated now, and I may just kind of like do just a little preview here, kind of give ourselves some idea as to what's going on. Yeah, I think it'll work. I have no idea again. And this time I'm going to do 100 frames because, well, 200 is great, but it could be long. I'm going to have to reload the filter, do a sweep, and boom, let's try this. My render pretty fast, actually. I'm seeing like pretty quick numbers, and I'm also like rendering relatively small. Of course, if you do a larger piece of animation, this is obviously going to take a lot longer. The latest version of FF Batchmaster does have some capabilities to input frames of something else. So if you want to run an entire animation through, you could actually process FilterForge. You could process like animation inside of FilterForge. All right, that's pretty cool. Oh, wait a minute, there's something wrong. Let me try that again. You know why? Because I made it only 100 frames long, and it kind of cut right in between. So, you know what? I'm going to just do this. Just going to cut it at 100 frames. And that way, we'll have a nice little loop. Pretty simple, right? And simply put, just by iterating on this process, you could quite quickly generate all sorts of cool stuff. Again, it's very simple in terms of it, and there's also a couple, like, you know, things that FilterForge can't do. For example, there is no temporal, what do you call it? There's no temporal, like, anti-aliasing in this program, so, of course, it's going to be a little jittery, but, you know, that's asking, like, for perfection, basically. I'll show you one more thing in regards to using Perlin noise, because there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind if you want to have a looping piece of animation, that is. So any kind of noise pattern, when you drag and drop and then use, for example, let's try using, I'm going to put a slider right here, and how about an offset? So let's offset this in the X direction, and you know, so I'm going to start out with the value of 0, just keep sliding, 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 and, well, at a value about 100, well, we're somewhere else, and I'm, you know, like, it doesn't look like this thing, right? Like, it doesn't look like it's looping at all. In fact, well, this is how it's supposed to work, because, well, at this point, we don't have what's called seamless tiling turned on. You need to enable this in order for the results to loop properly. So if I were to now go from 100 to 0, these two should look the same. And that's what you want if you want it to loop. If you don't want it to loop, don't worry about it. It's just a thing that you want to think about. All right, let's use this to our advantage here now. Let's try playing around with it a little bit, because we could also do some cool stuff with this. So how about we take, let's try, you know, I like Kaleidoscope because it just kind of makes it easy to do stuff with it. And how about we, actually, you know what, let's do something to this thing, right? So let's go in and drive curbs. Try that. Make it into nice little outlines. All right, pretty cool. Very cool. And so now we got ourselves some nice, simple animation there. Try offsetting that. Now, of course, I am using just like offset values here, but let's try doing something different. Let's try using a different function. How about, noise distortion is great, but we don't really have any parameters to like animate this over like distance or anything like that. So I'm gonna have to think about how do we use that. I'm gonna use refraction instead. I think this would work a little better. Or we could use like a Perlin noise to offset, you know, and then just drive an animation that way. Hey, you know what? Why don't we just do that instead? Let's do another Let's do another offset, copy and paste that. And we're going to use that to drive this offset. It's kind of like a little bit more randomness to the whole thing. A little messy too. Because, you know, you don't want it to just kind of like keep changing. You don't want it to just do the same thing. You want some variability. I like having some variation along the way. So I got two offsets now that are being driven. And you can see how like that is just kind of creating a very, very subtle but like nice little wave pattern here and there. Doing that. Oh yeah, here we go. Look at that. For some reason, it is not looping. I wonder why. Let's check out to see. Yeah, that's the seamless tiling is on. So you got to be careful. You got to really look at these values. Make sure that it's actually working. I think the percentage slider always needs to be 100. Ah, yeah, here we go. Now it works. But that means that I'm going to have to lower the values on this one so that we don't have so much of an effect on it. Because I don't want it to be just like a messy, like, you know, thing. I just want it to wiggle a little bit. Let's check it out. Let's check out the animation so far. Pretty cool. Very basic though. Okay, and let's try throwing this now into something else. So let's go into the Bomber Plus and let's try doing something with this. And we got ourselves some nice little pattern, but what if we want some variability? So I could let's make it into like you know, a bunch of nice outlines. And let's increase the width a little bit so that it shows up a little bit better. What if I were to change the repeat value? And of course, if we animate right now, the whole thing animates. Pretty cool, right? Okay. So, and let's decrease the size so that now they're separate tiles. A little bit more down. Increase the repeat value. And here's some little magic trick. We could use any of these guys to throw in a little bit more randomness to the whole thing. So now, if I were to take this, you can see how just by using one random, I'm able to get a bunch of different variations, which is also very fun to use. If I were to introduce a little bit more complexity to the whole thing, it will now do so. And now we got ourselves a very much of a set of randomly animating tiles. And that's how I've been basically doing the animation stuff. You can see how it was not really that complicated. It didn't take too many brains to do it. And not only that, it's actually pretty fun. So if we were to change the kaleidoscope type, we're going to get something different. Cool. But I'm going to want even more randomness here. So I'm going to use another randomizer to throw in some randomness into the kaleidoscope. So I'm going to input an HDR value of 3. That's going to bloat this white area, which is kind of like going to drive the mode, which needs a value in between, like, I believe there were set like a couple modes in here. Yeah, so if I wanted to go between like randomly between like square and triangle modes, I'm gonna have to input a value of 0 and 1, and that will go in between that. That's great. But if I wanted to go even further, like triangle 2, ROM 1, you know, and so on and so forth, I'm gonna have to input a larger HDR value in order to drive that. That's just how it works. All right, so now we have a bunch of random modes that are driving the whole thing, and you can see how that is kind of creating all sorts of cool shapes. Let's try making this different color, pretty sick looking. And just to make it a little nicer, I'm going to kind of frame it. Let's put a little frame around it. Let's put a frame like this one, nice. And then we're just going to drag in that. And there you go. Got ourselves a bunch of little tiles that do stuff. Maybe make it a little larger. Easier to see. Do I want this entirely white? Nah. Let's kind of keep it a little bit. Very good. Okay, so now we have this. Save the filter. Call it animation 2. Save that. And now we're gonna have to load this in to our lovely FF Batchmaster. Locate. Go into my FilterForge stuff. Where did I put it? Animation. You gotta always keep your eyes on where exactly you put your stuff. It's in pattern generators. Alright, here we go. This is it. Save that out. I want to offset slider X right here. Right that. And let's do animation. We'll call it like V2. And then start batch. It's going to take a little bit while to render, so I'll come back when it's done. Okay, so it has finished, and what we'll do is we'll just load it in. So let's just check it out. Pretty cool. And that's just basically how you do some very simple animation instead of FilterForge. Of course, you could design it, you could go even further than this, and you could really get some really cool stuff in, out of this program. Now, unfortunately, we don't have batch tools officially inside of FilterForge unless you use the command line renderer. I hope there's one day we'll see a GUI for that, and I really hope that we'll get something like this. Of course, there are many other tools that utilize nodes, and you can make patterns like this. I won't mention them here, but well, you probably already know. Anyway, with that being said, thank you so much for watching this little video tutorial. I hope this helps you along the lines of your creative process, and I'll see you in the future. All right, bye.